Hello, everyone, and welcome to our June edition of the MPF webinar series. And we're delighted to have as our special guest, Dr. Larry Richard. And many of you know Larry, recognized as the world's leading expert on the lawyer personality. So Larry, so glad to have you with us. How are things?
Thanks, John. Delighted to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. And many of you know, if you've been here before, my colleague, I call him partner in crime. He corrects me. Uri Goodfreund. Uri, how are you?
I am well, John. No crime has been committed. None will be committed today. Just for the record.
There's no crime unless there's a conviction. And, you know, I think we're all clear so far anyway.
And I have a conviction that there's no crime.
So we are all good friends. We've known each other for many, many years. And Larry was our kickoff. The first webinar we did when COVID hit, we invited Dr. Larry Richard to help us get a grip on it. Right. People were freaking out a little bit, but we've landed pretty well. And now we're dealing with getting people back into the office. And we're going to talk about the psychological impacts of COVID that may be having on your firm, its people, and how as a firm leader, you might address some of these things. How do you spot it? How do you approach the situation? Delicate conversations. So we're going to follow our usual format, lots of audience polling questions. We're going to share survey data that we collected at point of registration, and we'll package all this up in a nice set of handout materials for everybody. You'll get that tomorrow, as well as the recording of this session. So if you want to share it within your firm, you know, it's a good thing to do if you think it's relevant and important. So we like to start right on the top of the hour. I am observing the clock, and I think we're ready to roll. Are you ready, Larry? You ready, Uri?
Ready when you are.
Let's run. So welcome, everybody. This is our 23rd in the MPF webinar series that we're calling the Law Firm of the Future. And looking forward as we evolve from COVID and, you know, building a firm that's going to be profitable, successful, sustainable, and making sure we've learned some things. COVID, we're implementing those into our culture and improving all the time. Everyone, if you've been here with us before, knows Uri Goodfreund. Uri, how are you?
I am great, John. Get to do number 23 today.
It's amazing, isn't it? It seems like we started yesterday in a way, and it seems like we started 15 years ago in another one. But these have been, we've been averaging 120, 150 folks per session. We have 145 registered today, coming out of the holiday weekend. Hope everybody had a good Memorial Day. Those of you in the United States weren't sure, you know, how our attendance might be impacted, but everyone's showing up. We'll be doing our next program right after the 4th of July weekend, following that three-day summer weekend. Uri is the National Law Firm Practice Group Leader at Risk Strategies, frequent speaker. We met years ago on the speaking circuit, and based in New Jersey. And Uri, you're supposed to introduce me at this point.
We all know John. John is the hostess with the mostest. John has been in the legal world, advising law firms on most important issues, and it's been a pleasure doing these webinars and events with John when it really matters most. I think this is the test for this generation, John, wouldn't you say?
I think so. It has been fun. I've really enjoyed it, and I think you know, we've got a regular following and folks that show up episodically, but I really think we're providing value to firm leaders through these, you know, unprecedented times, to sound you know, cliche. Our program's coming up the rest of the year. We do these the first Wednesday of the month. 2 o'clock is the live. And so we'll continue in that rhythm through year end. We're going to do a virtual conference. We did one last month. We're going to do another one later this month, all women, and it's empowering women in law firm leadership. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that program, because I would encourage you to take a look at it if you haven't already. If you've come into our events, we got a listserv running. We got conference calls, the newsletter, the website. Our next in-person meeting is going to be, I can't wait, October 7th in Chicago. We are going to present our fall symposium. We're going to drill down on succession planning and transitioning your firm to its next generation of leaders. and helping your seniors along through retirement and life beyond law. So take a look at that as well. Our virtual women's conference, they made me take my picture off this collage here. I offered to put on a wig, but they wouldn't let me. So it's an all women faculty. Sharon Abrahams is our co-chair, and we've got a blend of managing partners, thought leaders. It should be a really good program. Take a look at that if you would. Our introductions will present our survey results when you registered. And then we've got some audience polling questions that Larry's asked us to present before he's going to talk for about 20 minutes or so. And then we'll get into questions and some interaction. People love the interaction, love the data, and we'll bring you plenty of that today. We do have live polling questions, 4 of them. And you can type questions in as we go. And Uri, people should know how to do this by now, but why don't you refresh our memories?
Sure. On your toolbar, it will say questions, and just put them in right there. And John and I will be monitoring them throughout. And when we get to the end, towards the end, we'll have some questions. You gave us a bunch during registration, and we'll add in the ones that you give us during the live program. So we'll be monitoring that and look forward to your great questions.
Hit Larry with tough questions. we want to watch Richard dance today. So we've got some interesting questions already. But if something triggers your mind, I mean, put it out there. Larry is, absolutely brilliant in terms of organizational behavior, from culture, the lawyer personality. It's not easy leading lawyers. We all know that. And so here's a tremendous opportunity to ask those difficult, sensitive questions around psychological impacts of COVID. So please take advantage of the forum. We're going to give you Larry's email, phone number as we come out of this, and you can try to reach out to him and continue the conversation if you'd like. Our next webinar, July 7th, we're still working on topics, so stay tuned. What's going on there? So thanks for listening to that, Larry Richard. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Larry's the founder of LawyerBrain, and his blog is called What Makes Lawyers Tick. And I think Larry is definitely the world's leading expert on the lawyer personality. Previous stints at Altman Weil, Hildebrandt. He's been speaking at our programs for how many years, Larry? 12, 15? Long time.
12 years. Yeah. 12.
We were both both much younger and better looking. I remember when we started. But Larry is no stranger to the MPF community. He is an attorney, a recovering attorney, and a PhD in psychology from Temple University. He's based in the Philadelphia area. So Larry, so glad to have you with us.
Pleasure, John.
First audience polling question. So you can play with your gizmos, and we always ask this, and this is for Larry's benefit, to give us a sense of firm size. So let me go over here to our polling menu and pick and you know what? I forgot to add this question this time, Uri. So I'm going to have to go by it. Larry, it's mid-sized law firms.
Thanks, John.
Hey, I've been on the road. I had my first client firm retreat last week, which was fun. And so
in person,
I got all excited and distracted over that. So forgot to include that question. When you did register, we asked, do you think there are lawyers at your firm that are having trouble dealing with the impacts of COVID? And overwhelmingly, yeah, we sense that we have some lawyers who are having some trouble, isolated, and maybe some anxiety, some depression. We asked, how about support staff? And we're seeing even higher numbers of perceived folks having issues evolving and adapting to COVID. Are you reaching out to folks, trying to help them out? Do you have an obligation to do that? And 75% of you say, yeah, we're proactively reaching out, touching base with our people. Neutral, that was an interesting answer I put in there, but kind of a little delicate. And we're not aggressively and proactively reaching out, but we're on the lookout for it. 3%, no. So here's our first audience polling question. And this one I do have in there. And this is a check all that apply. And Larry provided these questions to us. So if you all would answer this question for us. Have you noticed any of these changes in your people, including yourself? Check all that apply in the past several months.
And John, we realize some of these are compound, and if either one of the compound components check the box.
Boy, Larry gets really technical on these questions. But Larry, what do you think people are gonna tell us here in terms of the behaviors we may be seeing from our people?
I will be surprised, John, if we don't get all of these checked.
Okay, what do you think is going to come in number one?
That's really hard to say. I think distractibility has a good shot. Let's take a look.
We shall do so. And here's what folks said. Distractibility, anxiety. The bottom one, immaturity, inappropriate behavior. Give us some examples of what you're talking about there, Larry, that we might be looking out for.
Number one, we often see a lot of childish behavior. People, when they're uncomfortable, awkward, anxious, tend to regress. And so you'll also see people making inappropriate jokes, making funny sounds, things that we do when we're juvenile, when we're adolescents. And so a lot of that adolescent behavior creeps in to people who are even surprised themselves that they behave that way. It's just a sign of anxiety.
Interesting. Even among lawyers. We're going to go rapid fire through these polling questions because Larry's going to reveal some of the answers to these questions when he talks to us, and we didn't want you to have that benefit of knowledge before you answered these questions. So our next polling question is: which of the following is not one of the outlier characteristics of the lawyer personality? Larry, tell us a little bit about what you mean by this.
So there are 18 traits that people have in varying amounts in the workplace, personality traits. In most occupations, if you surveyed people, the scale goes from 1 to 99, 0 to 100. And you would expect people to get scores all over the map. But when you look at the average always regresses to the mean, which means that every one of the 18 traits averages at 50%. That's true for most occupations. There's a little slippage. And so we basically make the cutoff not 50% precisely, but anything between 40 and 60. So almost every occupation has all 18 traits averaging between 40 and 60. But there's one occupation, law, where 7 of the 18 traits are below 40 or above 60. That's just astonishing, John. There's no other occupation that even comes close to that kind of departure.
So,
and three of the following listed here qualify as technical outliers. One of them is not an outlier.
Okay, so we're looking for what folks think is not the outlier here.
That's
Uri, I'm going to ask you for a prediction. The votes are coming in about 80%. I'm in Georgia. We know how to count votes now. I think we're approaching our fourth recount. When will it end? But what do you think people are going to say to this, Uri? Uri, are you there? Oh, you're thinking.
He's thinking.
You're scaring me.
I'm scared. Not all of these are positive, and this isn't going to look good for me, John.
That's why I asked you.
Go with Larry's predictions on this.
Nobody said this would be a fair webinar. Right?
Give me the negative
so we know the answer, Larry. We cheated here. And I guessed with the audience on this one. I thought it was empathy. Lawyers are not empathetic people.
So we'll find out as we go through the seminar.
Let's move to our next polling question, which speaks to which of the following leadership tools do you think would be most impactful at this point? And if you would, go ahead and vote often. Uri, maintaining financial stability, making sure the firm's on good footing, social support. Get those hours in, people. Some business development training. And so everyone weigh in, and if you would, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's what folks have to say. Larry, we didn't ask you what the answer to this was, but here's what our audience said. Keeping people up is probably the most impactful thing we should be doing right now. Is that?
It's a great answer, John. It's the wrong one, but it's a great answer. And in the seminar, I will provide the correct one.
Ooh, you're going to keep us thinking.
Waiting. Yeah.
Wow.
Good tease there, Larry.
I'm telling you, I like it. And our last polling question before we turn the mic over to Larry. Larry's asked for about 20 minutes to speak to us a little bit, and then we're going to roll into some conversations. So the old theory X, theory Y, they taught us this approach in business school, Larry. But let's ask our audience what they believe to be the best way, best management philosophy, and working with lawyers.
So let me just say a word or two about these, John. Theory X is a philosophy of management that basically says you've got to hold people's feet to the fire. You've got to have a lot of, clear rules. You've got to punish people if they violate the rules. You've got to use carrots and sticks to get what you want from them. And people, if you don't regulate them, are going to get lazy, or they're going to cheat. They're not going to, pull their load. Theory Y says just the opposite. Theory Y says people are to be trusted. You have to give them the right tools to do the job and get out of their way. People are going to be motivated internally and so forth. So two very different philosophies. There was a very robust debate about this for decades.
I remember, when we in business school, they suggested that the theory X approach applies more to blue collar workers. If you're managing a McDonald's, for example, very different than managing a room full of lawyers. So Larry, you want to speak to this briefly before we invite you to?
We actually have a slide for this, John. So let's move on and we'll get to it.
Okay, and you should be able to take the screen from us right now and share your view. We can't wait.
All right, I don't see the handoff yet.
All right, hang on, you're right. I gotta make you a presenter.
There we go. Okay.
I always enjoy listening to hear Larry. He has come, I think, 12, 15 years running. He's keynoted our conference before, and people really either really get into this or kind of poo-poo it as psycho mumbo jumbo. But
so
John, I think you may have to clear the poll, John.
You have to clear the poll. There you go. All right. All right, can you see the screen now?
Beautiful.
Excellent, excellent.
Nailed it.
I'm telling you.
So here we go. The first point is that the crisis has disrupted three very fundamental human needs. And we all have these needs. And the question is, what has happened due to the pandemic? The first need is the need for predictability and continuity. And in a minute, I'll explain why that's so absolutely vital. We also have a need for control, that's been disrupted, and we have a need for connection, which has also been disrupted. So predictability is disrupted because our brain has a threat sensing circuit, and that circuit is on 24/7. It's always scanning our environment to see if there's any threat. Well, the mechanism that our brain uses is the whole idea of uncertainty or change. That's the trigger mechanism that our brain uses to detect a threat. And because of that, uncertainty is particularly suited to trigger stress and anxiety. Now, there are three kinds of uncertainty that kick us not just to alert, but to the highest level of alert. So what are those three things? The first thing is if the change is sudden and unexpected. The second is if the change is outside of our control, that'll trigger a high level of alert. And the third is if it's a seriously threatening change, something that can cause harm or death. And when you think about COVID, for the past 14 months, all three of these boxes have been checked off. This has been an unprecedented type of disruption, because I can't remember any other disruption where all three of these boxes were checked. So that causes a lot of stress for people.
Lawyers, Larry, are they a little more affected by this than the general population, given their personalities?
Absolutely they are, John. And in fact, the phrase, I have a slide for that, is something that we should all pay attention to, because in a moment, I'll show you that slide. The second need, control, that gets disrupted because we face a lot of constraints, and luckily those constraints seem to be ending. But for the past 14 months, we were restricted in terms of social distancing, the obligation to wear masks. You couldn't visit loved ones in the hospital. So we have this reduction in our freedom. And then people who were required to work remotely couldn't go into the office. We couldn't have those little everyday interactions with people in the office, which we think often are just kind of throwaway moments. But the research shows that those throwaway moments are absolutely indispensable to our well-being. And in fact, one of the quiz questions I gave you said, what's the most important intervention? And the answer is not financial stability, and it's not making people feel supported. It's social connection. The opportunity to connect with people, to have authentic relationships and feel like I am connected, I am part of some group. I see you, you see me, and I feel included and in a relationship with you. That is the single most powerful predictor of well-being in years of research. And it's research that comes from many different quarters, from medical research, from psychological research, from sociological research. And so this is something we didn't really know 20 years ago, but now this has risen from kind of a nice afterthought, the icing on the cake, to the cake itself. This is really indispensable. And most of us don't realize that. Lawyers for years have not only deprioritized social connection, but we often ridicule it and call it touchy-feely when it's nothing of the sort. It's central and indispensable. So we're disrupted in our connection because of the same reasons that we lost control in some ways, like we can't visit friends or haven't been able to until recently, hospitalizations, and so forth. Now, as John said, the lawyer personality makes all of these things worse. Every human being is disrupted in these three needs, but lawyers experience them worse. And the reason is because we're trained to think like a lawyer, which is basically looking for issues and problems, and that creates a kind of negative thinking. In fact, if a little voice in your head just went, no, we're not, that's exactly the instinct. That's the gut response that we're all trained to think about. And it can be the most important tool in helping us practice high quality law, but at the same time, it causes us some real side effects that are undesirable, including it makes it more challenging to promote our own well-being. It makes it harder to be both a leader and a follower. It makes it harder to have inclusion and diversity. It's difficult for a lot of reasons, that negativity. So the ideal thing is if we can use our negativity in our lawyer role and then be adaptive and use more of a trusting approach in the other roles that we play. So what are the lawyer traits? I've talked about this many times before, so instead of going through all of them in detail as I usually do in your webinars, I'm just going to list them to remind people what the lawyer outlier traits are. Lawyers are way, way more skeptical than the general public, equally high in autonomy. We do not like being told what to do. By the way, high autonomy works for us because the legal profession affords great opportunities for high autonomy people to basically control their world. We get to do what we want. We have our own practice, etc. But the very downside of that exact same trait is that in a world where the government or other forces are constraining us because of the pandemic, high autonomy people experience those constraints much more irritably and more severely than regular autonomy people. We're high in abstract reasoning. We like to analyze, and we like mental stimulation. We like to use our large brains. We like to argue. It's fun to do that. We like, going deep into issues, even if it doesn't get us anywhere. We're urgent. We like to get to the solution. We cut to the chase. We're impatient. We're low on sociability, which is not to our advantage. So far, this is the one trait that I can't find a reason that it enhances the practice of law. I think what it boils down to is that people who tend to be socially awkward but really smart go into law in disproportionate numbers. It doesn't mean all of us are that way, but it's a safe place for somebody who's socially awkward. Low sociability means I'm not really interested in disclosing a lot and getting into a conversation about my private worries and concerns and fears. I'm private. High sociability people are very open and willing to share their private world with others in exchange for deepening the connection. And then the sixth trait that I've talked about, all six of these traits I've talked about for decades. Low resilience. We're very thin-skinned, easily hurt or wounded, very defensive, especially if we're criticized or left out of a meeting. Now, there's a seventh trait that has always been low. It's been around 41%. And if you recall, a moment ago, I said it's only an outlier if it's below 40 or above 60. Well, this seventh trait has always been 1 point above 40. So it never qualified as an outlier, but that's changing. In the last 3 years, solidly, and maybe a little bit more evidence of it 4 and 5 years ago, this trait has dropped below the 40% line. It's now a solid 38%. What is it? Low cognitive empathy. We don't take the perspective of others. And when I say we, it's mainly much more pronounced among millennials. That is, people who are basically 38, 39 years old and younger. And so this cohort has, by one study, 40% lower cognitive empathy than the previous cohort. So how do you restore these disrupted needs? The first thing is predictability. We can't restore the disruptions in the external environment, but we can do something almost as good, which is direct our brain's attention to things that are predictable, and that quiets the threat circuitry just as well as if the external threats went away. So you can do that by creating clear goals that you communicate to people, and by creating the counterpoint, clear expectations that you communicate to other people. So when I have clear goals myself and I tell you what I expect of you, I'm going to feel more like my world is more predictable. Establish a daily routine. Admiral William McRaven of the US Navy has a great little video on YouTube called Make Your Bed. And he talks about why the simple act of making your bed every day is a helpful routine that starts the process of feeling like I've checked the boxes, I've started accomplishing things. Pay attention to things that haven't changed. Direct your brain to things that are stable and predictable in your world. And create rituals. A ritual is kind of a routine that has the added feature of it's meaningful. So births and deaths and becoming a partner, those are rituals that we create. Those give us restored predictability.
Larry, can you back up? Just point of clarification. Goals.
Sure.
Are we talking about firm goals, group goals, or more personal goals?
Individual goals. When an individual creates a goal, it gives people a sense of clarity. At the same time, group goals will do the same thing. So if you're a managing partner and you're trying to lower the threat level, lower the uncertainty stress that people have, reminding people what goals already exist, creating some new clear goals, it doesn't matter whether you create them or just remind people what they are. The drawing of our attention to goals that are clear is what serves the psychological mechanism here.
Give us a clear example of a firm goal that you think would be impactful. Is it a strategic plan? Is it meeting billable hours and revenue projections? Is it?
So let's take an
Back to
example. I work with a firm that has just put a lot of its eggs in the healthcare basket. And one of the commitments they've made is that they're going to double down on healthcare as a primary practice. They've got primary and secondary practices in their firm. And so they've made it a primary practice. And the expectation is that at every opportunity, partners are going to prioritize healthcare work over other work and look for opportunities to get new healthcare work. So by making that a clear priority, something that has a higher value than certain other practice areas, which, by the way, was no easy task because low resilience people feel, anyone in other practice areas feels
Yeah, if I'm not in the
wounded.
healthcare group.
Yeah, exactly. But
Right.
it's designed to lift the entire firm up because everybody benefits, even if you're doing other work. And many of the other practice areas, corporate work, there's corporate healthcare work, labor and employment, there's labor and employment healthcare work, and so forth. So it can inure to the benefit of everybody if the firm, abides by this. The point here is not that healthcare is any, great shakes. It's that the clarity, the fact that we have a focus and we're uniform in focusing on that, actually is soothing to a brain that has been disrupted by uncertainty.
Okay, thank you.
Larry, it seems that some might see that as adding on to the stress, but I think if I'm hearing correctly, your point is by focusing away, even if it is in the short term, a little bit more work or stress, it's going towards something you can control. And that's really the goal. The goal is to focus on what you can control versus what you can't.
Your point is well taken, Yuri. It's a different kind of stress. The stress of I have a lot on my platter is a very manageable stress that we're very familiar with and we know how to deal with it. Whereas the stress of I don't know what to expect is a very, very hard to manage stress that triggers threat sensing responses. It's a whole new layer, a whole new level rather. The stress of I have too much on my platter is not going to trigger the brain's threat response.
Well, I would think, Larry, making sure these goals are realistic, achievable, measurable. Setting goals and falling short is not the most, energizing and spirit lifting thing. I would think. So as you set goals, be realistic.
Yeah, when you're setting goals, John's referring to the acronym SMART.
Exactly.
So the SMART acronym, I think most people know that by now. Those types of goals are what are called well-formed goals. It's a goal that, has, a meaningful target that is within our control, that has a deadline, et cetera. So yes, SMART goals are the way to do those goals. But the main point is a goal is better than not having a goal. Goals that are clear are better than fuzzy ones.
Partners as well that talk about a BHAG. Let's not try to take on 15 projects. Let's pick on one important rallying project we can all get behind and get her done.
So a BHAG is a big, hairy, audacious goal. It comes from the book Good to Great, and it's basically a stretch goal. It's a goal that says, boy, gulp, I don't know if we can do this, but let's put all our eggs in this basket. Let's commit to this. And when people commit to a stretch goal where you're not sure you can do it, it's kind of like a moonshot. It says, if we can do this, man, we can do anything. And it really mobilizes people's commitment. So it's a good thing to do. It's not the only way to go. Nobody should walk away thinking the only way we can proceed is with a moonshot. That's simply, there's a small percentage of people who are going to find that it's worth doing that. Burn the boats is another famous metaphor.
I just hope we hit the moon, because if we don't, we're giving those skeptics a lot of fuel.
Yeah, exactly. So sense of control, similar advice here to restoring predictability. Turn your brain's attention to what is within your control. And also when you give yourself an assignment or when you give someone else an assignment, instead of just saying do X, put it into some sort of a binary form. Do you want to do X this way or that way? Just that simple binification of the goal gives the brain this sense of, oh yeah, I have a choice here. I know it seems silly, it seems kind of made up, but it actually is psychologically reassuring. And then there's one other thing that's quite within our control that gives us a sense of control that may surprise you, and that is do deep breathing. We have two systems in the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is the circuitry in our body that automatically regulates functions like your blood pressure, your heartbeat, your breathing, etc., respiration. All those things happen automatically without our thinking about it. Everybody's been breathing as we've been talking. But if we move from autonomic, unconscious, automatic breathing to conscious, purposeful breathing, we can do two things that will shift us from the stress response, which is called the sympathetic nervous system, to the relaxation response, which is called parasympathetic. And that's number one, inhale deeply, deeper than we normally do when we're breathing unconsciously. And number two is slowly exhale so that the exhale is longer than the inhale by about 50%. So if I inhale to the count of 2, I want to exhale to the count of 4. And that longer exhale triggers the brain and it shifts it into this relaxing parasympathetic state, which is almost instantaneous.
Interesting.
And then finally, how do you restore connection? There are a lot of different ways to do this. It's the most complex of the needs. The first thing is leaders in firms should reach out to 3 at-risk populations. Number 1, people who are living alone. I don't know, not everybody has a list of those people, but if you know that your lawyers or staff are living alone, lawyers, because of our negativity, are more at risk for depression and to the ailments that are on the spectrum leading to depression. And so it helps to reach out. Just human contact can reduce the risk of depression. The second group is people who have young kids at home. It can be very stressful for this group. And so if you can spell them, if you can at least talk to them, give them a chance to have an outlet so they feel understood, that understanding can go a long way to reducing their stress. And the third is people who have additional stressors, like someone's in a bad marriage and they have to stay cooped up for a year. Someone has a person at home who's sick with COVID, or an aging parent, or some other situation like that. These are things that leaders often don't know, they're not aware of. But if you do, I'm not suggesting that you poll people, these are private areas. But if you happen to be aware that people have these stressors, being compassionate is a very helpful thing for a leader to do. Compassion pre-COVID was something we rarely did. These days, compassion has boundaries being extended. In other words, it seems a little bit more appropriate to ask, how are you doing personally today than it did 14 months ago, if you're in a leadership position.
Larry, is there any data that says how often to do that? People talk about that all the time. In the beginning, we were doing it every day, every week. Is there any data on either the frequency or the method, Zoom, phone call, maybe in person? I mean, what's the data on that?
I haven't seen any studies on that, Uri. So I would say this is one of those areas where we just fall back in common sense. Do I feel like if I were in that situation, do I want daily contact? Probably not. Do I want yearly contact? Too infrequent. Something between daily and yearly is the right answer. And I think it's up to each individual to figure that out.
Why?
So wide range there.
Yeah, it's a big range, but I think we can narrow it down. And finally, a couple of quick points about building social connection. Interesting research out of University of North Carolina. 1 second of eye contact or more produces the hormone oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical. It makes us feel connected to people. And so eye contact is not an inconsequential little flitting moment that passes by without consequence. It actually matters, and it actually produces really helpful, positive chemicals in your body. So every opportunity you get, if you're in person already, make eye contact more than you might have pre-COVID. Even on high quality video, eye contact can have a benefit. So I encourage that. Number two, presence. When somebody's talking to you, if you are multitasking and you're saying to yourself, hey, look, I'm getting my email done and I'm giving the person at least part of my attention, so I should get some credit. The research shows you don't get any credit. Multitasking is not a gradation. It's not like you get some credit. You know, the less I multitask, the more credit I get. Any multitasking eviscerates the feeling that I feel understood and paid attention to. As soon as you multitask even a little bit, you're in a whole different category. You're now making the relationship more negative instead of more positive. So the only way to be in a relationship, if you're talking to somebody, put your phone away, give them your full attention. They should feel like you are really taking in everything they're saying and understanding them. Periodically, feel free to check back, active listening. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, and you can just kind of summarize, but basically be 100% present. Number three, incredible research on gratitude and the expression of gratitude. It's one thing to feel gratitude, but the simple act of thanking people, the simple act of reaching out and saying, you know, you didn't have to do X, Y, and Z, and you did it, and I really appreciate your doing that. It is a world apart, 180 degrees apart from leaders that I have heard say the following. You know, I don't know why we need to thank people. We are paying them, aren't we? that attitude is completely not supported by the scientific evidence. In fact, it is a good prescription for alienating people and sending them to another firm. So expressing
Should this expression of gratitude be public or more of a private one-on-one?
Again, you have to know the people you're dealing with. It's really a function of personality. So introverts often prefer that their gratitude is received in private. Extroverts often like it publicly. So you have to know your people. If you're just doing it blanket, I would say err on the side of doing it privately. But if you know that there are individuals who appreciate the public recognition, and there are a good number of them, but there are more in a law firm who don't appreciate the public recognition. That's why I say err in favor of private gratitude expression. And then finally, perspective taking is what really matters. That is stepping into the shoes of another person and trying to see the world from their perspective. And this is really one of the most indispensable leadership skills. When people feel like you understand the world the way they see it, not the way you see it, it is ironically and paradoxically one of the things that moves people off the dime. If I want to persuade you of something and you don't feel like I understand your position, you're going to dig your heels in, and all of my persuading is going to be met with resistance. But as soon as I evidence to you that I understand your position and I see why you wouldn't want to change, you now have the freedom to be open to what I am proposing. Okay. So perspective taking is incredibly powerful. I'm going to turn it back to you guys. So
leave that placeholder slide, Larry. We'll just actually let's just dump the PowerPoint right now, I'm thinking, and just talk for a bit. And
okay,
I'm
so
looking through the questions.
Leave the thank you up.
Yeah, leave it up. What the heck?
All right.
I'm looking at the questions we got, and a lot around how do we approach? We sense someone's having issues, whatever. They're exhibiting some of those behaviors we talked about earlier. How to approaching it. Give us some guidance here. What should a leader do?
So the question is, how do you approach somebody?
Yes, that you perceive may be having some psychological issues, you know, falling out of COVID, or even, you know, before COVID, you know, you sense depression or substance abuse or whatever. How do you?
what I recommend is that leaders should take the time to reach out to their, what in a corporate structure, we would call it your direct reports. So in a law firm, it might be practice group leaders or other senior members of the leadership team, like the executive committee members. Reach out to that first level of leaders and ask them first, how are you doing? And do it uniformly. Don't single out one person and say, you know, I think you look like you're having some trouble, because the low resilience is going to get triggered.
Oh,
You want to ask every leader, how are you doing? And you can say to them, I'm calling everybody. This is not something, you know, it's not like, because a low resilience person, what are they going to say? Oh, you're asking me how I'm doing because you think I'm having trouble?
yeah, you're isolating me.
So,
Yeah.
right. So you want to ask everybody within your, what the corporate writers call span of control. So that's the top leadership. And then you want to invite them to reach out to their people. Now, some are going to have groups that are way larger than they can do that with, but they can do it in a webinar. So in firms, for example, where I have a practice group leader of a litigation group where there's over 100 people in the litigation group, here's what I tell them to do. They have a weekly planning call, everybody on Zoom. And they can't say to each person, all right, we're going to go down the list. Everybody tell me how you're doing. What instead we do is you say, before we get into the business of our meeting, I'd like to hear from everybody. How are you guys doing? How's everybody
Larry,
holding
I
out?
accidentally turned off your camera on my end. I was trying to get your slideshow go back to mine.
No problem.
There we go. And I
Yep.
hit the wrong button.
So,
Thank you.
So you do a webinar with all of your people in your group, and you simply say, you kind of build a frame, say, before we do the business part of our meeting, I want to take a moment to just be human with everybody and say, look, I want to ask everybody how you're doing. First, I'm going to talk about how I'm doing as a leader. You know, what are my vulnerabilities? Vulnerability is one of the most powerful things a leader can do in evoking humanity in those that you lead. So if you share your own situation first, and then you ask people, how's everybody else doing? And people will voluntarily report out how they're doing. And whenever someone is vulnerable and says, you know, I'm having some real trouble, I'm having this or I'm having that, almost invariably, other people on the call will say some form of support. You'll see somebody reach out and give support. It's beneficial in a lot of ways. When we're working remotely, we don't have any bonding mechanism. This kind of vulnerability gives you that bonding mechanism. It makes it more likely that people feel a sense of I'm part of something important because I feel connected. And as a result, that benefits the loyalty and the sense of connection people have to the firm. And it also teases out whether there are people who might need extra help. And at the end of the call, as a leader, you can simply say, you know, thank you for talking about these very personal things. If anyone would like to chat with me for additional help or resources, please feel free to reach out to me offline.
Larry, we have a question that I think one of our participants was brave enough to ask, but I think it's certainly beyond, or it's quite obvious to a lot of us, which is, so one of our participants asks, so I ask how you're doing, and the person reports that they're struggling, depressed, etc. What do I do? So we've identified it. We care enough about our group to ask. Now they tell us, what do we do?
So the first thing is talk to your human resources people. Most firms have highly qualified HR people. They're trained in these things, and they're trained in the local jurisdiction laws, the rules and regs. That varies in state, you know, every state. There may be things in your partnership agreement that bear on this. There are, you know, lots of other things that are idiosyncratic. So I can't make a blanket recommendation to that. The basic general idea is you want to reach out proactively to anyone that shows you in any way I'm hurting. People who are depressed, when people get depressed, let's take that in particular, because that's kind of the riskiest type of impairment. If the next risk for depression is suicide. A certain proportion of people who are depressed commit suicide or make attempts at suicide. And so when someone's depressed, two things happen. Number one is we disconnect. We disconnect from people. And number two, we get passive. So when you say to somebody who's passive and disconnected, anybody need my help? The depressed person is like, why bother? And they don't reach out. And so it's the one ailment where I say, you know, you really should talk to your local people to see if this violates any rules. But my own instinct is I want to be much more assertive in reaching out to somebody who evidences that kind of portrait, because they're not going to reach back out to me. And you may save somebody's life. The worst that happens, they may feel like you intruded on their privacy, and they can tell you that. So it's a delicate road to hoe. I mean, no one would want to live with the fact that they could have helped avoid a suicide. At the same time, nobody wants to violate the personal space of an individual. So it's a very, very tricky road to hoe, but just be aware that depressed people do not reach out, even if you ask them if they need help, as a general rule.
Well,
follow up
Larry,
to
when
that.
we
Follow
were,
up to that. I'm sorry, John. A follow
no, you
up to
go.
that.
I want to just make sure we touch one thing before we leave today.
A follow up question, because we've got a lot of questions here, which is how can I inspire? And this is an inspirational question. So, but it's an important one because people there's a lot of new responsibilities over the past year. One is checking mental health in a very serious way. Previous to COVID, that wasn't very common. Now, obviously, we're trying to, for the reasons you just said, really focus on it. But how can we inspire, and this is a question from Bill, how can we inspire other leaders of the law firm? For the example you gave, I mean, it's a large law firm, and there's 10 practice leaders and 3 executives or 4 executives and 1 managing partner, 1 administrative partner. They all have some responsibility, but a lot of them are shying away from this. One person can't do it alone. How do you inspire? If you had 30 seconds, Larry, what would you tell them to get them to participate?
It's less what I tell them than what I role model. Role modeling is the single most powerful tool that a leader has. So when a leader demonstrates the very behaviors that you're asking your other leaders to do, that sends a more powerful signal than anything you can tell them.
Lead by example. And Larry, as we were assembling our materials, I think most of us are familiar with that pretty infamous Hanley Hazleton ABA report back in 2016. And one of the co-authors, Krill, has updated his research, fresh, two weeks ago, I believe.
2 weeks ago, yeah.
And what did we learn in there that you think is important for today's audience to know?
Well, first of all, this recent study that Patrick Krill released was methodologically more sophisticated than the 2016 study that he released. It is as troubling, if not more so, because in the 2016 study, we learned that lawyers, the first 10 years in practice, were the most at risk for alcohol abuse and other problems, including depression and anxiety. Wow. In this study, his data show that women are also at much greater risk from the stresses of COVID. And that raises another issue, because a lot of people are talking about hybrid working. And depending on the kind of hybrid rules that you come up with, there's an excellent cover story. I should digress for a minute. The current issue of Harvard Business Review, the cover story is called Getting Hybrid Right. And McKinsey also came out with a recent article on hybrid workplaces. They're both very important references. And what they talk about, among other things, is that when you do asynchronous hybrid, which means different people are in the office on different days. There's a reason for that. A lot of schools, for example, did an A group and a B group because it reduces the demand on resources and, you know, reduces the teacher load and that sort of thing. But when you do that in an office and everybody's never there on the same day, that itself poses some problems in terms of building culture and in terms of communicating. But the other thing is, if people are given permission to come in when you want to, the research that they cited showed that there was something like 70% more, women are 70% more likely to work from home than men are. And that means that they are disadvantaged in terms of getting good work. And there's already a significant, serious challenge in terms of gender diversity in law firms. And the last thing we need to do is to take a step backwards and put in place some sort of mechanism that makes it harder for women to get good work. So be very mindful if you're going to implement work from home policies that you do that in a way that, number one, gets the input of women and show them this research so that they can make an informed decision about the way that the work from home policy is rolled out.
And we will be sending these articles Larry's talking about in the handout material, in the follow-up we'll be sending tomorrow. Both the Krill study, the more updated one, this 2016 study. I mean, this is stuff that firm leaders, we think, should be paying attention to. It's important to running a high-performing law firm and people who are satisfied and enjoying what they do. What about in person? You know, so many law firms now are looking at, you know, planning firm events and the summer picnics and the firm retreats and such. No time to waste. What's your recommendation generally on bringing back live events within the firm?
So my recommendation is intense gradualism, John.
Intense
gradualism. What do I mean by that? We all want, you know, we're bursting at the seams, we're chomping at the bit. We want to get back to life as we knew it. At least many people do. But if you look at the studies, 30% of people surveyed said, no way, no how, I'm not going back to working in the office. Another 30% are saying, I'm not going back full time, I want to work hybrid. So there's only 30 to 40% who say, I want to go back full time. Secondly, we have, for the most part, depends on individual experience and it depends on the jurisdiction, but as a rough rule of thumb, for about 14 months, people have been working remotely, working from home. It only takes, depending on the study you look at, you know, 21 days, 3 months, et cetera. It takes a certain period of time to form a habit. Whatever that period is, we're well past it. We've now habituated to working from home. We're asking people to break that habit and to work in the office. You can't just flip a switch and expect that people will willingly go back to work and resume behavior. We've actually atrophied our social skills. People are going to feel ambivalence about touching. Do I shake hands or do I bump elbows or do I bow? Yeah. What do I do? How's that going to work? Nobody knows the answers to these things. There is a lot of additional uncertainty that's going to be introduced into the system when we do that. Furthermore, when we work anything less than 100% return to work, which is inevitable that most of us are going to do less than 100% return to work, we have another problem, which is hybrid working. When some people are in person, some people are on video. It creates haves and have-nots. When we're all on Zoom, there's not a problem. Everybody's happy with it. But when some people are face-to-face, they have an advantage over those that are on Zoom, and the Zoom members can be forgotten or overlooked easily. And they'll feel like second-class citizens unless you as a leader take extra special efforts to ensure that people on the video are included as robustly as people in the room, and to make sure that those people do not get an unfair advantage. The ones in the room do not get an unfair advantage over those that are on the video. And on top of all of that, if it was stressful going from our normal workplace that we were used to for years to Zoom video, people had to adjust, and you saw a lot of articles over the last year, Zoom fatigue. How come we get fatigued when we're on Zoom? And it's a real thing. There are a lot of reasons why people get fatigued when they're talking on Zoom. Some of those reasons remain, like the difficulty of seeing facial expressions. That doesn't change. But some of them, like our familiarity with the medium, we get familiar with it and it becomes habituated and it's okay. But the point is, when you moved back to the workplace, I've heard a lot of people say, oh great, the stress of being on Zoom all the time is going to reduce. It's going to increase. Why is it going to increase? Because we're going from Zoom, where even though not everybody's on it, everybody's participating in some way. The people in the office are on Zoom with the remote people. The remote people are on Zoom with the office people. So we still have Zoom, and the people in the office have an additional burden. How do I navigate two different computational systems? One is I'm used to talking to people on a video. The other is how do I deal with people in person? And then an added stressor is how do I do both of those and switch between them, which is an additional cognitive load. So we've got more cognitive load than we've ever had, either working alone or working on Zoom, and that's going to stress people out.
And I got to think a lot of people don't realize this is happening, you know?
That's right. Look, it takes
the
place
lack of
in the
self-awareness on some of this.
It's easy to not be self-aware, John, because what happens is all of these things that I'm talking about manifest themselves in stress, and stress manifests in the form of irritability, distractibility, passivity. That's why I asked those questions at the beginning. And when you see somebody acting irritable, most people just go, why are you being so irritable? They don't see the link between that irritable behavior and everything I've just talked about. All we see is the end game, which is the undesirable behavior.
So are we looking for a change in behavior? Because some people are just grumpy, you know? Are we looking for someone who used to be happy-go-lucky who's suddenly become a little tough to...
You don't have to be happy-go-lucky. Think of it as whatever the bell, you're looking for a change, exactly. Whatever the bell curve is, wherever you are on the normal bell curve of irritability, if it goes more toward the irritable direction for whatever your baseline is, that's what you are expecting in this kind of a fraught time. And so you have to be sensitized to the fact that people are going to behave in these ways that I've enumerated, and it almost always is likely to be due to the stress or the stressors that I've talked about. What can you do? Number one, as a leader, exercise compassion. This is not a word we use a lot in law firms, but it's something we should be using for the next year, because we're really going to need it in order to support our people and bring out the best in them. It sounds touchy-feely. It is rooted in hard behavioral science, in neuroscience. Compassion actually has been studied in functional MRI scans, and it shows that when people exercise compassion, it reduces the threat sensing mechanism in the brain. It increases the parasympathetic response and makes people feel more relaxed. There's a study out of Case Western Reserve that just came out a couple of weeks back that shows that when we are in the parasympathetic state, we actually function better, learn more, and remember better. And conversely, when we have a kind of, I'll call it a sympathetic nervous system style of leadership, where we are tough on people, unrelenting, punitive, do this or else, hard ass. When we have that approach and we say it's good for them, they need that toughness. No, they don't, because what this fMRI study showed us is that when you treat people that way, it literally shuts down the hippocampus, which is the region of the brain that does learning and memory. And if your goal, suppose you're giving feedback to an associate and you really want them to do better as an associate, and you do it by being that horrible professor in The Paper Chase, I forget his name. You're just really tough on the associate. The associate shuts down and doesn't learn. And that's true of people in general. It's especially true of low resilience lawyers, and it's especially true of low resilient millennial lawyers who are not only thin-skinned, but low in empathy. And so you really have to exercise compassion for this group and, you know, check in with yourself so that you don't have those judgments where you're going, you know, this person just isn't up to my standards. Just put that on the side for now and cut them a little bit of break.
Larry, I'm looking at the clock. You know, I love this stuff. We could go on the rest of the afternoon as far
Right.
as I'm
And I've
concerned.
gotta-
We've
I've gotta
learned that
jump off
our
myself.
crowd leaves if we don't end right on time. So it is 3:04, and I want to thank you. And again, we'll have you back. I hope, you know, those of you
Fantastic.
coming to our leadership program in May next year, Larry will be there. We can all break some bread and socialize some. I think everyone's looking forward to that. This is everyone's contact information. Feel free to reach out to any of the three of us directly. Our women's program, I'm excited about this, and take a look at that. Want to plug it. It's on June 17th. And finally, thank you again, Larry, Richard. Uri, thank you. Appreciate your participation, co-hosting. And
Pleasure, John.
Larry, any parting shot before we turn things off?
Well, the parting shot, John, is the one thing I should have mentioned that I didn't mention is more than anything else, what we can all benefit from is self-awareness. There's decades of research showing that leaders who are self-aware are better at all of the other things that I've mentioned in today's seminar.
And what's the one thing I can do to become more self-aware?
There are a lot of ways to do it, John. My favorite is to take some sort of personality assessment. There are lots of really high quality ones out there. Look on my website. I've mentioned them in some of my blog posts. Or feel free to reach out to me. I'll recommend some.
Excellent. Larry, thank you so much. We will see
My
you
pleasure,
soon.
John.
And Uri, thank you again. We'll see you
John.
soon. And thank you, everybody, for being with us today. We will send you the follow-ups, the recordings, and hopefully this was helpful to you, your law firms, and come back and see us at a future webinar. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Uri. Bye, everybody.